Hvor skal du?
Jeg går over så fort som mulig.
Her?
Ja, hvis det går fint.
Ja.
Kjempebra. God natt.
God natt. Ha det bra.
As well as a higher education law, which critics believe could lead to the closure of the Central European University. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Susanna Streeter.
And I'm Roger Hearing. One of the world's largest car manufacturers, Ford, has ousted its chief executive after concerns about slowing sales and a sliding share price.
Plus, on a visit to Israel, President Donald Trump has said he sees a rare opportunity to bring peace to the Middle East. Can business help foster ties?
Trade between Israeli and Palestinian companies can definitely be the bedrock for future peace agreement.
And on the election trail in the UK, the Green Party has promised to bring in a basic universal income.
What we need is to have that radical redistribution of wealth that is not just tax breaks and not just social security, which become very, very complex, but giving everyone a basic payment so they have the choice.
That interview with the co-leader of the Green Party, Jonathan Bartley, coming up.
You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. That's a quote from Henry Ford, who founded the Ford Motor Company back in 1903. Now that resonates particularly well today, given the ousting of the firm's chief executive, Mark Fields. He'd planned to create a new generation of self-drive and electric cars, but as rivals Tesla and GM surged ahead in development, the company's share price plummeted. The firm announced earlier that he's retiring. Henry Ford's great-grandson, Bill, the executive chairman, explained how that came about.
To be clear, I didn't fire Mark Fields. Mark and I sat down after our board meeting on Friday, had a long discussion, and he decided to retire. That's an important distinction.
Now Jim Hackett will take the helm. He's headed up car maker's self-drive division, and Bill Ford told the BBC why he'd confidence in him for the top job.
I've known Jim Hackett a long time. He was an absolute transformational leader at Steelcase, which he ran for over 20 years. He took a company that wasn't first in the marketplace, that defined itself as a furniture manufacturer.
So, is Jim Hackett really the right man for the job? I asked Michael Martinex, a journalist at the motoring website Crane.com.
Well, Ford certainly thinks so, and if you think back, this is almost similar to the move they made when Bill Ford picked Alan Mulally to help steer Ford through the financial crisis. Alan was at Boeing, which made airplanes, a much different scenario than building cars and trucks. The point is, though, that Hackett, like Mulally, understands corporate culture and understands how to win and how to inspire a team. So Ford's looking at this from a bigger picture, not quite just knowledge of building cars and trucks.
And what was it that Mark Fields got so badly wrong?
It seemed like everything was in place for Ford to succeed, especially in this area of new mobility and autonomous cars and electric vehicles. But Ford says that the message wasn't just quite clear enough, and that the company seemed to move a little too slowly. It was a little too hierarchical in nature, and they're hoping that Jim Hackett can change this.
So Jim Hackett, from what we know about him, is he a man, I mean, you say he's got good knowledge of corporate culture, but is he also someone who can move ahead on those really technical issues, I suppose, which, as you say, is independent motion cars and this kind of thing?
Definitely. He has some experience in this area. For the past year, he's led Ford's Smart Mobility Unit, which they created as a subsidiary to sort of handle all the major decisions when it comes to driverless cars and things of that nature. And he's pretty well connected in Silicon Valley, and that's one thing that really resonated with Bill Ford when they went out to California. All the heavyweights knew Jim Hackett. They didn't know his relationship with Ford, but they knew of him through various past interactions. There's one story that while he was with the furniture maker Steelcase, he helped Steve Jobs from Apple make some decisions on how to change the furniture around the Apple headquarters, so he's pretty well connected out there.
But is it not possible, really, this is all a bit too late, because Tesla and GM, to some extent, have really got a head start on Ford, haven't they?
The perception is that they have a head start, but in reality, Ford's well along in its path in some of these new ventures. It's going to bring a fully driverless car to market in 2021. It's been acquiring software companies, IT firms to help it create these driverless cars. So it has all the ingredients in place, but Tesla and GM have made splashier, sexier announcements, if you will, and Ford has kind of been on the back burner in terms of PR, in terms of communications, and that's really what they're trying to correct.
Michael Martinex of Crane.com. So how did all this play on the markets? What was the effect on Ford's share price? I asked Doug McIntyre of 24/7 Wall Street.
As is usually the case when an unpopular CEO gets booted out, they sort of rallied, and then, it was not an impressive rally, given how badly the board wanted to think of the guy as they pushed him out.
So the confidence level in Ford isn't that great, even so. They want to see what's going to happen first.
I think that when you take Ford and say, how long would it take to turn Ford around, the answer is years, if ever.
And I guess in other areas, the big deal with Saudi Arabia, is that boosting defense and technology shares?
It is, and I think there's also a relief that Trump had a good day. I think that at least there's this break where Trump had something good to say, and that's a huge relief for investors.
So it really makes a big difference to the president's standing as far as the confidence on Wall Street is concerned.
Sure, because you go from people who are a little bit nervous about an impeachment to this thing of, well, Trump went over to Saudi Arabia and came back with billions and billions of dollars. So the swing in that pendulum is very big.
And the tech shares, tech obviously is a very strong area for America, and I suppose great hopes now that there's going to be a lot more in the way of exporting and success in that area.
Yes, because I think in general tech companies think that there's some parts of the world that they're sort of kept out of, and better relationships with the Arab world would improve that.
So is the Arab world a big area then for investing in tech areas?
I think it is when you look at the companies, the big oil companies, for example. They have massive amounts of data that they put through. Cloud computing has an opportunity there. Companies like Oracle. There's enough infrastructure being built in the Middle East, so that's also a big deal.
Doug McIntyre of 24/7 Wall Street. So how did it in fact look in terms of the share price of Ford? Well, it was making $11.10. That's up 2% on Wall Street. And there the Dow was up 0.4% at 20,894. Here in London, the 100 share index was up 0.3% at 74.96. Now for the rest of the day's business news, here's Susanna Streeter.
Facebook's internal rules for regulating what its 2 billion users can and can't post on the site have been leaked to Britain's Guardian newspaper. The training guidelines suggest Facebook is, in some cases, tolerant of forms of bullying and live videos of self-harm. The company said there were always going to be some grey areas, but that safety of its users is its top priority. So just how complex is the task of monitoring social media? Earlier I spoke to Adam Hildreth, who's the CEO of Crisp Thinking, which moderates sites for hundreds of companies. I asked him what he made of Facebook's internal rule book.
The key thing we get from this rule book is just how hard a job it actually is to moderate sites like Facebook and make the decision. I think the big thing from my perspective there is where Facebook draw the line on the decisions they make versus how we make those decisions as a society. We should really be deciding what content's acceptable or not versus the networks themselves.
So you think that in fact it's censoring too much and that it should be up to the users to decide completely?
Actually, in some ways I think they don't censor enough. There's some things within their guidelines that they choose not to remove, that us as a business would actually remove ourselves. And then there's other things as well linked to politics where they choose to remove it.
Give me an example of elements or pictures or comments that you think they should be removing.
So I think there's elements related to self-harm where they have almost an acceptable policy to say there's some elements of self-harming, even with young people, that can be left on the site. From our perspective as a business, we draw the line there. But also you've got the danger on the other side, which is the freedom of speech side of things, which is they're removing commentary related to certain political parties and not others as well.
as a moderator, how do you train the people who moderate? What kind of internal rule book or guidebook do you operate with?
So the big difference with what we do at CRISP is we don't actually let humans make an actual decision. They don't decide what should or shouldn't be removed. They answer a series of questions. So we're removing that ability for them to decide based on their views whether something's acceptable or not. It's a hard job to do, but it's definitely possible.
So they don't decide at all. It's an algorithm that makes the judgment.
It's a mixture, actually. We ask humans to answer some questions, and then from those questions we decide whether the content's acceptable or not. And what we found, if you ask someone to say something like severe profanity, actually the definition of severe profanity is very, very different depending on the type of person and where they are based in the world. So we try to remove that subjective nature away from it. There are lots and lots of rule books as well, though, and training that we have to go through.
Do you sometimes feel that some of your moderators might have made the wrong decision, and how are you able to go back on that?
Absolutely. So, we're all human, and humans will make, incorrect decisions, and they will make mistakes. We're a massive believer in quality assurance to the point where sometimes we'll ask two different human moderators to review a piece of content to make sure we've absolutely got that decision correct.
President Donald Trump helped bring about peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Well, that's his aim. Today he's been in both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as part of his first trip abroad as president. He said he sees a rare opportunity to bring stability to the region. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcomed the president at Tel Aviv airport.
Never before has the first foreign trip of a president of the United States included a visit to Israel. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for this powerful expression of your friendship to Israel.
Well, ahead of Mr. Trump's arrival, Mr. Netanyahu had announced a range of concessions making it easier for Palestinians to do business. But Ed Rose is the chief executive of the Israel-America Chamber of Commerce based in Tel Aviv. I asked him what hopes he had of Mr. Trump's visit and just how crucial trade ties are between the two countries.
It's responsible for about a quarter of overall Israeli foreign trade. And for many industries, it's actually the first destination. Like many of our high technology industries look to the U.S. for their first market outside Israel. You may know that about 200 U.S.-based firms have set up a research and development center in Israel. So Israel, for many technology U.S. companies and pharmaceutical companies, Israel is the first or second research and development center outside the United States. So obviously Israel also plays an important role for the American-based companies.
But as far as Israel's progress in setting up and increasing trade ties with the rest of the world, the peace process has been a stumbling block, hasn't it? What can Mr. Trump do to reignite peace process negotiations?
Well, I think putting the political question aside, since we're talking business here, trade between Israeli and Palestinian companies and cooperation between Israeli and Palestinian companies and American and Palestinian companies can definitely be the bedrock for future peace agreement, because the business creates opportunities for people, prosperity, education. At the end, what will matter most are creating those partnerships that will bring Israelis to Ramallah and Palestinians to Tel Aviv. They're only a few miles away from each other, and still they're like a sea apart. But if we actually create these steps and we create these relationships, this would be a lot more meaningful than any back and forth political maneuver.
But with the peace negotiations at a standstill, really, what concrete steps can businesses take, perhaps encouraged by the U.S. administration?
So the Israel-America Chamber of Commerce that I'm heading is leading an initiative together with the Palestinian-American Chamber of Commerce. We have formed already last year, even before Trump has become president, a framework for Israeli, American, and Palestinian companies to create joint ventures, to create partnerships, do joint research and development projects, joint production, and create those long-term relationships between companies and actually between people.
So if there is more cooperation, which sectors do you think should be the ones to watch as far as Israel and Palestine are concerned?
You can certainly watch the technology sector. There's a lot of interest for that in the Palestinian side, and definitely Israel is one of the leaders in the high-tech industry. Water is another sector, food is another sector, construction, definitely. I would say these are the big four sectors that I would look for.
The UK's Green Party has launched its election manifesto promising a universal basic income, greater protection of the environment, and a final say to the public following Brexit negotiations. The Green Party co-leader Jonathan Barclay said his party's Green Guarantee contained big and bold deals which are possible, saying the Greens were committed to redistributing wealth and power and scrapping Trident, Britain's nuclear deterrent. He said it was time for an honest conversation about tax, saying that Germany had higher rates of public spending than the UK. I spoke to him a little earlier and asked him for his party's vision for the UK.
Well, it's a vision for what we're calling a caring and confident country. We reckon that we can lead the world over issues such as climate change and show real leadership where we've slipped in the past. We can take bold steps to introduce a shorter working week in the long term, obviously not something that's going to happen overnight, and also look at reforming the welfare state to bring in a basic income to prepare us for a 21st century economy.
What do you mean we slipped in the past?
The country, used to have quite a vision of leading the world in terms of tackling climate change, investing in renewable energy. But since then, the government has, for example, come forward with a £30 billion subsidy for Hinkley nuclear power, rather than investing that in a renewable energy revolution around the coastline of our UK, where sadly Labour also support those plans. And we think that proposals such as the New Economics Foundation have come up with, which suggests that we could generate over 6 times our annual electricity consumption just from offshore renewable energy is the way to go to restore and rejuvenate our coastline economies, as well as creating that clean energy that we need.
The problem is that many voters are struggling to pay their energy bills as it is, and actually renewable energy is more expensive in many cases.
Well, in the case of Hinkley, it clearly isn't. Offshore renewables are already cheaper than what we've locked ourselves into over Hinkley, and they're coming down. And this is Hinkley is a very, very bad deal for the consumer. It's a centralised energy supply, not decentralised, and it doesn't give opportunity for the local communities, as we would propose, to create their own renewable energy and then sell it back into the grid. It's more expensive, and of course it isn't something that's going to provide security that we need in the long term. We've just seen the cyber attack on the NHS. What happens with something like Hinkley? Is that going to be vulnerable to cyber attack as well? We haven't had the reassurances that we need.
Let's look at your other pledges. You're saying that you want to introduce a basic universal income. How would that work?
Well, this is something that's being piloted right around the world at the moment in various places, looking at how we can reform the safety net. And the idea is that over the last 30 years we've created huge amounts of wealth and we've had huge technological advance. Our economies are more productive than ever. However, what we've seen, instead of people seeing the benefits of that, we've seen growing inequality. And what we need is to have that radical redistribution of wealth that is not just tax breaks and not just social security, which become very, very complex, but giving everyone a basic payment instead of that tax break or instead of that social security, so they have the choice and they can, for example, pursue more educational options. They can care for a loved one and have that basic safety net, or they can be entrepreneurial and pursue startups with that safety net of the basic income, a basic payment given to everyone, but then clawed back through progressive taxation, so when people are making a lot of money, that money comes back to pay for it.
Don't you risk, though, subsidising low wages in this system?
Well, at the moment, the existing welfare state in the UK is massively subsidising low wages.
So why would this be any different?
Because there isn't the same poverty trap as you have with benefits. For every maybe £2 that you earn, you lose £1 in benefits. So people aren't making that big leap when they go into work and take up more work.
But if companies know that their employees have a basic universal income, why would they push up wages?
Because simply we want to also see, something that goes in tandem with the other policies, such as increasing the living wage. We want to see the living wage rise to £10 an hour by 2020, and of course this would decrease the benefit bill, the welfare bill, because it means that you have to fork out less in subsidies.
How would you pay for the basic universal income?
Well, depending on what level that you want to set it at, you do it through progressive taxation. And if we were, let's compare the German economy with the British economy, we can look at example of a country like Germany and see that there is enough money when you've got the political will to get it. They spend 44% of their gross domestic product on public expenditure. We're down at 40% and falling. If we just raised our levels to that of Germany, we'd be looking at an extra 100 billion pounds per year, which is a very, very significant amount of money, enough to invest decently in our public services. So where would that come from? Ideas such as a wealth tax, a Robin Hood tax. We can get rid of a lot of subsidies. We don't want to waste £30 billion subsidising Hinkley nuclear power. We don't have to spend £110 billion renewing Trident. There are many subsidies, for example, £6 billion to fossil fuels subsidies every year. These can be cut and taken away, and we can put the money into the productive part of the economy that's really going to create that kind of green industrial revolution that we need to develop the jobs, particularly around our coastline.
You say that billions could be saved by scrapping the Trident programme, but by decommissioning it, that would be also very costly as well. Some estimates put the total cost of ending the programme and abandoning its replacement, because you'd have to end contracts already signed with big multinationals, at around £90 billion.
Well, we've actually taken a very conservative estimate, so we're talking about 110 billion. And let's remember, Trident is up for renewal anyway, so this is the moment to do it. Reuters Analytics says it's about 155 billion pounds, and CND at the top end are saying 210 billion. We're actually taking the lowest possible estimate, and of course we're the ones that have been doing the work on this. We revealed actually some of the money, 2 or 3 or 4 billion pounds, was already spent before Parliament gave the go-ahead to renew Trident. We've been the ones that have actually been on the money, so to speak, so we're very confident about our stats on that.
Are you committed to another referendum on Brexit?
We're committed to a ratification referendum, and again, the debate isn't often a common sense one. It's as if, the country made a decision, and come hell or high water, no matter how much the global economy tanks, whether there's a war, and no matter how bad the deal, this is the line down which we're going. That's no way to run a country. That's not responsible. It's not common sense. And if we trust the Parliament to have a vote on the final deal, which the government has reluctantly said it will, it's accepted the principle, how much more should we trust the British people to have a say on the deal? Because it is the British people that will have to live with the consequences of that decision. And if both Remainers and Leavers find out that that deal is not what we were told, that we don't get, for example, £350 million a week for the NHS, which is frankly ridiculous, if there is a £100 billion Brexit bill, which is almost the entire annual NHS budget, I think people will be asking a lot of questions, say, hang on, this wasn't what I voted for, even though I voted Leave. I know people in my family voted both Remain and Leave, and I trust them. They both did so for the right reasons, because they wanted a better country. They thought it'd be better for the country. And if we find in the final deal that actually it's not going to be better for the country, then of course they must have a say in the final Brexit deal.
Jonathan Bartley, Green Party co-leader. Now, apparently, corporate nonsense is alive and well, so much so that there's now a degree course in the subject. Over to our regular commentator, Lucy Kellaway of the Financial Times.
Students at the University of Washington have been offered a new course entitled Calling BS in the Age of Big Data. For the past couple of decades, week in and week out, I've been calling BS in the Financial Times, and so was delighted to hear my favourite pastime had made it into academia. While this course is limited to spotting BS in numbers, there's an equal need for one spotting it in words, especially words used in business. What follows is an outline of a rival course aimed to fill that gap. It starts with a definition. BS means nonsense, usually of a puffed-up variety that pretends to be something it's not. Sharp ears will spot at once the difficulty in applying this to corporate life. Almost everything fits the description. So the first rule about calling corporate BS is not to do it too assiduously, or you'll go insane. I have learned to ignore 95% of it, and of the remainder, ask myself two questions. What is the quality, and how damaging is it? I've gone through dozens of examples of BS that have come my way in the past couple of days, and picked three that are worth calling. The first is a branding document